today. It's in an area that's currently under construction. So much like the region, our really cool archaeology is being impacted by modern use of the land, but we're also being allowed to do this work because of the generosity of the landowner. And this could not have happened without the Desisti family working with us and actually saving the area that we're working on so that we could do our excavations. The site itself is located close to, not too far from here, it's a couple miles away. It's directly along the Susquehanna River, as you can see. Some of you probably, if you're from this area, recognize where it's at. And it's also, let's see, I'm used to having a mouse. There we go.
Doing?
Good.
Yeah. Wait, do we have a pointer?
Okay.
No.
No? Okay.
Yeah.
Hang on. Somewhere in here is, maybe not. Right, can you see the arrow?
2 or 3 miles.
All right. So the site's actually in this field here. You can see that there's a drainage, little creek system that comes down through here. This is the perfect location for any population today and in the past. You got this wonderful little creek system coming down to the rich resources of the larger river. Now this photo, take a look at, this is from 2006 from Google Earth. So you can see what this landform looked like. Whoops, sorry, hit the wrong button. What it looked like before a lot of activity took place. And what we're really looking at is if you see the, shoot, sorry folks. Hard for me to see on here. Oops, did the wrong thing. All right, sorry. The green is actually right on the edge of a terrace that overlooks the river. So that green space and the field beyond it or behind it, to the north of it, is a rise, maybe, I don't know, about how far above would you say, 10 feet or so?
Oh, no, it's
like
60 feet, I think, above river level.
Oh, okay.
At this point.
So it's a
No,
good,
I'm sorry, 20 feet. above
okay, it's significantly higher, and it's lower down here. This is a perfect place for an ancient village. You're high enough above that your houses aren't going to get flooded, but you're just right over where your agricultural fields would be and then the river. This shows you what it looks like today. In fact, I think this is a photo from either last summer or this summer. And what we're really looking at is this area here. What the Desisti family is doing is they're bringing in fill to raise this land even higher so that they can eventually build housing in here. But what you're looking at is the edge of that terrace is right along here. This funny little blue dot you see there, it does show up. That's actually our canopy and tents from our excavation. So here's what we're doing. This material, the white material on here, this is already 15, 20 feet of material that the Desisti has added on top of that terrace. So the actual village site for the folks who made the archaeology I'm about to show you is underneath that modern fill. So ironically, that's also preserving and saving it for the future. Of course, what that means is we can't really excavate in that area. So we can't tell you a lot about perhaps what their houses were like. However, this edge of the terrace and this area you see here, all these dots, those are where apparently there was a strip of a workspace for the village. So imagine a village right on the edge of that terrace, and that is where they created large underground storage pits to store their food, ovens, earth ovens, fire pits, and other materials. So we've been working our way pretty systematically from sort of the west to the east and along here. So all along through here are signs of this really, really cool ancient village lifeways that used to be here. So starting in 2016, we realized a couple of things. First, I had to throw Deb in there. Because none of this would have happened without Deb orchestrating, organizing, and sort of really making all us ducks in a row. So none of this would have happened without that. But what you're looking at is, can you see the traces in the ground? I'm not sure it's going to show up too well. It's a little dark. But if you see the different color of soils, dark and light, the light material in this case are broken pottery pieces. The dark material is places where people cleaned out their fire pits and threw the trash into a large pit. But I'm guessing that you probably can't really envision quite what I'm talking about. So I'm going to show you in a moment a little kind of animation I put together so you can kind of envision this. So when you do archaeology, you have to think sort of in 3 dimensions. You have to think what happened into the ground as well as on the surface. And one thing I can say, there's a shot of the lads. This site has been extremely wonderful to excavate because each one of these sort of underground pits are little time capsules, snapshots of the ways of life of our ancient past, and they are filled with all sorts of wondrous things. So, you're probably trying to figure out, really, what is that? What does that mean? So, here's what I want you to imagine. Somewhere along that terrace edge, 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago-ish, someone decided that they needed to have an underground storage place to store their crops, their nuts, the things they collected. So come along, this is sort of looking, the white is like looking at the ground surface, with, let's say a deer scapula shovel, and they start excavating. They excavate themselves a nice little hole in the ground.
Nice.
Yeah, 3 feet deep, 4 feet deep, 3 or 4 feet wide. For some of them, we can tell they were lined with grass, right? And they didn't have refrigerators back then. Then they would fill it with, let's say for some time periods, shelled corn, squash, some other time periods, hickory nut shells, right? Berries, dried berries, and probably put a large rock on the top of it, and then eventually they would draw those resources out. Now, you have a problem. You have a hole in the ground. So you imagine someone getting up at midnight to go, call Mother Nature and fall into a pit. You don't want that to happen. So what they would do is, it sort of becomes like that ravine that you had on Grandpa's farm where everybody threw the trash. Now you throw in some animal and some rocks from the area you were cleaning up. Maybe Mama goes in and cleans out her fire pit inside her house. She throws that debris inside the pit. Someone comes in, some folks have been working on stuff. Oh, they dropped a pot and things. So they're filling it up with soil from inside their houses, their workspace. That's what the different colors are. The dark is from charcoal, wood charcoal from the campfire. Someone dropped a pot and broke it. Throw in the sherds, right? Throw in some more debris, right? Eventually it gets abandoned, water washes in more sediment, and it gets filled up. But if you come in and you carefully scrape the surface off, you can see the circular stain, right? Like this one here, from one of these ancient pits. So what we do is we excavate a portion of it, a corner, a half of it, to get a view of the interior. Does that make sense? Can you kind of envision that now? And this one was really fun. The white, if you wonder what this white material is, that's where someone had a clam bake. Those are freshwater clam shells that were thrown in. As well as all sorts of things. Some of this material you can see in the case in the back exhibit area. We have pottery and stone tools, some weird stone tools. They seem to do a lot of stuff with stones. We're kind of like, what is that all about? And one of the important things about this is that we have lots of collections from many, many years ago, the 1800s, early 1900s, people walking fields, finding pottery, finding stone tools. But no one had really had a real good sense of the time period that these belong to. So doing these careful excavations allow us to carefully collect that wood charcoal, the nutshells, the organic stuff that you see, and then we send it to a lab down in Florida where they can do tests on that radio. I'm sure how many of you have heard of radiocarbon dating? You may not quite know how it works, right? What it is it's a really fancy Geiger counter. And they crunch up all that organic material, and they can tell you how long ago someone burned that tree, ate those nuts, right? So very carefully, we've been systematically submitting samples. Nutshell and plants that grew on a yearly cycle is the best bet, because you might accidentally get some wood from the center of a 300-year-old tree, right, to throw the dates off. But most of the dates, as you can see, the dates very beautifully lined up, right? 3 different large pits, all had about similar dates, all had similar styles of pottery. So that's really nice to see that all kind of come together. Now, what's important about this, all right? Hang on. There we go. I put in too many fancy things apparently. This is a really critical time frame we don't know a lot about. Most folks at least know about the heritage of our Iroquois population. You've heard all about Iroquois? It's still a big mystery. Where did this unique culture come from? There's still arguments amongst professionals and avocation archaeologists. Did this unique culture that's still today that we call the Iroquois, did that grow out of the cultures that were here, right here in this area? This area is center, right? This is ground zero for all of this.
Yep.
Or, as some argue, did the people we call the Iroquois migrate into the area from the southern regions, right? It's still a big mystery.
Yep.
And ironically, although we're ground center for all of that, no one's systematically done research here. And the one thing we do know is it's this time frame, about 1100 AD, somewhere in that ballpark, that we start getting really significant cultural changes to the populations that would lead to something that we would call an Iroquois, archaeology, longhouses and all of that kind of really cool stuff. So this is really critical, very, very critical time period. So we have a chance with these excavations to write a part of the record of the history that still remains very much unknown. Who were the Iroquois? What was the relationship between what we think of the classic Iroquois, the folks today that we know as our Seneca will be here today, the Seneca, Onondaga, all the other groups, to an equally famous group that gave the name to the river, Susquehannock, Susquehannock. And this region is also very famous for that group as well. What's the relationship between all these peoples? What happened? And there's some really interesting early history here. So, with that in mind though, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the 2018 field season. Pop in sometime if you're fine?
Fine.
All right.
Great.
So,
Just a couple of points. That you saw 3 pit pictures, the one with the clamshell, the one with the nice layers, and the one that Tom, the Schurmeister, got the big piece of pottery out of. Those 3 different pits gave us radiocarbon dates almost identical to each other. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind going forward. That, we've got some indication that we're working with activities that occurred, if not in the same visit, then within the same decade or the same generation of use for this site.
And that's also really important. That'll tell us a lot of stuff. From the material inside those pits, we can look at what kind of foods were they eating. Are there different seasons? Do I find nuts from the fall? Can I find a spring berry? Were they growing crops? One of the biggest mysteries when we were digging those early pits is I had assumed, as many people did, that these would have been folks that were growing corn, right? Maize agriculturalists. But and I knew that if they were, we would find when we were excavating, because these guys excavate so beautifully, that if there were any burned corn cobs or charred, we should find them. We didn't. And I did look at looking at the microscope of some of the soil, and it's not there. So it's a really big mystery. We're going to come back to that mystery. Now the 28 field season, we just continued moving further to the east. In this case, though, and this will give you a real good clue as to how much archaeology is in that ground. Almost every square inch along that terrace edge has archaeology in it. This, for example, Deanne and Don and the others that were working decided to open up what we call block excavation, a very large area to see how many pits would be in there. And what you're looking at is, well, the ground's missing. Most of the ground's missing because almost all of that was giant pit after pit after pit. You'll see that as we go through this. Okay?
Let me interject here, a brief correction. We opened up the block excavation not because we had a bright idea, but because she told us we had a block excavation. And the reason she told us that is that in the trench excavations we'd done in the prior 2 years, we were finding almost no post molds. I think in 3 years we had 3 post molds. Dee has been doing field work where post molds are everywhere in Ohio. And she just could not believe that we had all of this pit material and no post molds representing structures built on the site. So she said, you gotta open up a big block of areas so we can see where the post molds are and how they relate to each other.
And also to figure out what's going on with all these individual giant pits too. Oh my goodness. And as the season progressed, even though we had rain after rain after rain, the guys, and most of the guys, I didn't have a chance to get out as often as I'd like, really opened a lot of ground, as you can see. And in doing that, started to find more of these large and medium-sized pit features as Dan's looking at, come on, there you go, at this thing. And again, that dark earth you see is people cleaning up their fire pits, cleaning up the floor of their houses, right, and throwing their trash in. I'm not sure this one, I'm not sure that's going to come out too well.
Yeah, you can see
Let me
it
see.
if you know.
What this just shows you is how intensive this archaeology is. Dan, you explain this one.
Okay.
I'm going to make him do this.
There are 2 things to notice here. One, this is not a very pretty excavation, and the reason is we had some water damage pretty consistently through the month of August, where water was getting in underneath our tarp and washing out walls of the units that we had excavated. So all this mess over on the right-hand side is not the way we ordinarily leave a unit. It's what you find when you've had a small stream running through the site. The really significant archaeological point is on the left-hand side. You will see what looks like a wave, a dark arc of soil arcing up from the left to the right, and then arcing back down again from the peak of that wave and back down. And what I think is going on here is we've got intersecting pits. That the one on the left was excavated first and gradually filled in, and then the one on the right with less, not quite as dark a fill layer, was dug in on into the edge of the original pit. So you get these layers of dark organic or charcoal laden fill, cutting the other one off. One of the things, these are features 27 and 29, so we've got basically 20 or 25 pits. And this is the first time we've encountered anything that looked like intersection of pit fill.
Do you have enough evidence of a difference in time between the two pits?
Not yet. I got that picture 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So.
Just hang on, we'll come back to that.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. We didn't find as many sherds this season as we did perhaps in the past, but we did find some, and they were quite beautiful. This is our Clemson Island.
Clemson Island's a very well-known pottery style from this time period in central Pennsylvania and up the West Branch of the Susquehanna. And oddly enough, given where we are, it's the first clearly Clemson Island or Wickham Pompeii pot that we have found in here. Everything else looks like the standard New Yorkie kind of pottery for this time period.
In other words, no one knows quite what to do with it.
Yeah. I should point out too that this did not occur in a pit, but came out next to one of the pits that Tom excavated for us.
That Tom.
Now, I do want to point out, we had sort of two work areas, west and the east end, and we thought, let's see, who is that? Jeff was working in this corner over there. So this is me standing in the back taking the photo. And he had a very beautiful pit feature, kind of cut into. Kind of see the edge here, coming down and around, a little bit on the bottom. But what was important about where Jeff was working is in this area, he did find some post molds. It's a little bit hard to see, but right on the edge here, you see these rocks? What they did is, and there were a couple in the back behind it, is apparently they had some smaller wooden posts perhaps around the storage area. And when they removed the post, or when the posts were abandoned, they ended up putting in them, or associated with them, these funny rocks. Now they're not just rocks. Keep in mind, in this soft, sandy soil, anything of that size somebody brought in. It's a little bit hard to see, but in each of these clusters, if you take a look at that one, that's actually, those are artifacts. They were working on those stones. This looks to be what we call a celt, a woodworking tool. It's like a small axe. And there's some other stone tools in here that were worked on. They're not quite formal yet. They're doing something to those. So we're not really sure what's going on, but we've been finding lots of these kind of crude stone tools at the site. That's kind of neat. There you go. And then you can see there's obviously something going on over here because a lot of the guys over on this side, and that's because there were a whole bunch of really interesting intersecting large and smaller refuse pits. Yeah. In this area, like right where, just about where Dan and Tom are standing, as they're excavating, something odd came up. You probably can't even see it. See a funny shape in the middle of all of that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I got this phone call, frantic phone call saying, we're turning up something really weird in the pit. Could you come out? And I always, when somebody says something like that, I always come out. And this showed up. Yeah. Anybody want to guess what that is? If you know, don't say.
Metate?
Pardon?
A mano or a metate?
Well, the stone you see is probably something. You'll see some more of that. Notice that the dirt is also kind of red and dark, so it's got a lot of burned earth and burned stuff. But that light-colored stuff,
Yeah, it looks
here's
like
the
a
whole
hand.
thing excavated. But you still can't quite figure out what it is. And there's the rocks you were talking about. See
The
the rocks? No, hang
dinosaur
on.
bones.
This is a slightly different view. Let me turn it around. Right, so what you're seeing is this material here is this before it was excavated. What is that?
The hand.
Dee had to come all the way up from Bloomsburg to tell us, because none of us knew.
An ancient dinosaur.
Well, they did think, and there was some consternation that it might be
A leg bone.
like
hand
a human burial. All right.
What?
Yeah. And I can see why. It does kind of look like it, doesn't it? But the minute I looked at it, I knew what it was, ironically.
She's the only one that knew.
All right, and I said, now guys, don't get too excited here, but this is seriously cool. This is really, really cool.
I see what
It is,
a person.
No.
scrunched
no,
up.
it is, are you ready for this? Drum roll, please. A large, pretty intact except for the tips. I'm thinking probably elk antler. It's either elk antler or a really freaking big deer. The shape of the base to me suggests elk, and it looks funny to you because what they did is they removed the tines, the pointy bits.
See, the ends are
They
taken
often
off.
did that to use
tools.
those for arrow points, dart points. There was some other work done on it, and then apparently they decided they were going to use the rest of it, and they threw it out with trash, like the stone tools. And there's the guys. If you wonder what's going on here, here's our problem. How do we excavate this without destroying it? Okay, it's really delicate. Talk to folks, got some
That
great
took weeks.
ideas.
Plaster.
Used a light mixture of glue and water, all right? And then, and I'm taking the photos, letting them do it. And then they come in very carefully with this big metal sheet. They literally cut the whole thing out in the block of soil. It's actually up in the lab, waiting for someone to do some micro excavation on it. Now, what's also cool though, let's see, I think I have a photo in here. Hang on. Yeah, I did. Darn it. All right. Is they also noticed, I think it was Dan who first saw this, that scattered in and around the elk, right, around the antler, burned corn kernels.
First ones.
The first one. And Dan brought some for me to look at, and I verified. I know it doesn't look like it to you, okay? This is Indian corn, right? Has a different shape from modern corn, particularly when it burns. Those are burned Indian corn kernels. And I was very excited because I knew that with the new radiocarbon dating, we could send, in fact, those kernels there were sent to radiocarbon corn. You can't get better than that because you know that corn grows in 1 year. You know that someone grew it, someone ate it, somebody messed up their supper.
Okay, a quick correction. I was the first one to recognize the corn kernels, but I found them in a groundhog burrow 6 feet away from where the actual deposit was. So at some point we had a happy groundhog go through the unit where the antlers and the concentration of corn was, and it's kind of spread it out over about 4 square meters of the site. Rich Price, who's not here today, did most of the excavation, the detailed excavation on the antlers, and recognized this big cluster of corn associated with the antler.
Did you get a carbon date on the antlers?
You can. You can, but you can't. Currently, with the glue on it, and to be honest, radiocarbon dates on bone can be very problematical. this is the best thing to use right there. Nuts, seeds, corn kernels, right? That's the best. We couldn't ask for anything more golden than that. Not only will we get a date for that human activity, we would get a date on this early agricultural product, this domesticate, and there's not a lot of that in this area either. That's maybe one of the first. And what you're looking at, I did want to point out, is if you wonder what's going on, these funky things right here, that's the base, right? So imagine a big elk or deer antler, that's the base where it hooks into the skull. That's why it looks funny. Then with the tines, you know, the antler coming off. So we set it to bait antelope. Now I want to point out that we did get this one odd date up here. Look at this one. This one's not as old, right? And that was nutshell. And we didn't quite know what to do with it. That's 560 radiocarbon years ago, compared to almost, 900. So that was kind of odd, an outlier. Right? Curious. Well, there's the new date, and it matches almost perfectly that first date. So the corn kernel, and it makes sense, was used somewhere around 1330-ish AD. All right? So it looks like we have at least two currently defined occupations. We've got two major occupations. So as a village, and use of this area around 1075, 1100 AD. And then a later one, 1330, 1350 AD. And this is so exciting and so cool because that spans that critical time period of cultural development in this area that we know so little about. We've got a time capsule right where the Chemung and Susquehanna comes together at this site. Some really, really cool stuff. So this was very exciting. And it also may suggest that corn agriculture, maize agriculture, did not come into this area, did not get well established until much later than most people think, than most professionals think. So we still got a lot of mysteries to work on. So this is where we're at today. These are the newest. We've got a really cool sort of elk antler. We've got now we've got maize, corn kernels, which is really exciting. We've got some new radiocarbon dates, and we have plans to work out there in the upcoming season, I would imagine.
Given the fact that we are driving around bulldozers and
We're trying to get as much done as we can.
Yeah, we may not get another season out there. The fill is coming in very, very quickly. I think John's added about 2.5 to 3 feet of new fill on top of what he's already had down. So.
But at least we've had a chance to do this. And keep in mind, we're still in early days of processing all that material, of understanding it, comparing it to the known archaeology area. So we've really just barely begun. The average difference in archaeology is from excavation to really pulled together is like 6-7 years. So, we still got, we still have work to do down the line. But we do want to thank the Desisti family. Without their generosity, none of this would have been possible. It also gives us a grounding, by the way, to do more work in this area. There's a whole number of very famous sites that were excavated in the 1800s, 1920s, and 30s before we had new techniques, better techniques and technology. So, we've got our eye on those, right? And, this sort of gives us a grounding, a framework then to go fill in those gaps on some of those really famous sites. We've got our feet on the ground. We've shown that we can do this. We've shown the importance of that. So this will allow us then to move forward in the future. We also want to think that none of this could have been done without all the oodles of people who have come out and helped us excavate or helped us behind the scenes. from equipment to orchestrating things to setting up archaeology days. Last year, we do one this coming weekend. And of course, from Dick and Ted, who sort of got the whole thing rolling many, many years ago with their curiosity, their interest, their knowledge of the area. Certainly, Barbara, I can guarantee that this work's going to go forward because of your donation. We desperately needed that lab space, as you can see, to help process all of that material, plus all the material that's here, and for hopefully the upcoming future field seasons and other sites.
Well, remember, you know, we started this whole vision of doing this work 12 years ago. 12 years ago. And you guys have brought it to actually being done. So thank you, Dee, and thank you, Dan, for all of the hard work you guys have put into this. But we're not done. We're just getting started. This is site one. Expect a lot more updates.
And you're ironically going to see this a little bit later because Dave Moyer is going to give a presentation. And he's going to be talking about this mystery about the Iroquois and the local stuff. And he's going to include in that some other work that's been done. On
another site.
Right? Instigated by conversations between Deb and I, right? On a very, not to give too much away, a very, very famous site in this area where we were able to go and use modern technology, radiocarbon date, a really famous site and a famous thing.
Yep.
That you'll know about when he talks about it. So we got lots of cool stuff that we can be working on.
And we're just getting started. Thank you.
Yes. And this is just to say, there's Tom doing his thing.
And there's Tom.
Everybody's going, Tom, what do you got? Tom, really? Another big shirt? Okay, so I had to throw those in.
Awesome, you
All right,
guys.
and that, my dears, is it.